Imagine living your entire life inside an invisible prison. There are no walls, no iron bars, and no guards to keep you locked inside. And yet, despite the open doors, you never step outside. Not because you are physically unable to, but simply because you are afraid. You are afraid of what people might say. You fear they will laugh, criticize, or ruthlessly judge every move you make. So you stay quiet and keep your head down. You don't share your ideas, you don't start that business, and you don't live the life you actually want. Instead, you perform a carefully crafted role. You perform for your relatives, your friends, your colleagues, and even for complete strangers on the internet. But the strange and tragic part is this. Most of the people you fear disappointing are not even thinking about you, as they are too busy worrying about their own lives. Yet, this invisible fear silently dictates your choices every single day. It shapes your career, your ambitions, your creativity, and your authentic voice. The fear of judgment is one of the most powerful psychological forces in human life. It has silenced more ideas and shrunk more potential than failure ever could. But what if this prison was never actually real? What if the only thing standing between you and your true life was a fear existing purely inside your own mind? Most people believe the biggest obstacles in life are external things, like a lack of money, a lack of talent, or a lack of opportunity. But in reality, one of the most powerful forces shaping human behavior is something far more subtle and insidious. It is the underlying fear of being judged. This fear operates quietly in the background of our everyday lives. Most people never consciously notice it, yet it influences an astonishing number of major life decisions. Think about how often people stop themselves from doing something meaningful simply because they are terrified of what others might think. Someone wants to start a business, but worries their relatives might call it too risky. Another wants to change careers, but fears their friends will question the decision. A creative person wants to share their work with the world, but hesitates at the last moment because they dread potential criticism. So, instead of acting boldly, people default to the safer path. They stay in comfortable jobs they no longer enjoy and hide ideas that could actually help others. From the outside, this cautious behavior looks like practicality and maturity. But underneath, the real driver is often a desperate desire for social approval. Human beings are deeply social creatures. For thousands of years, our survival literally depended on belonging to a group, and being rejected by the tribe meant certain death. As a result, our brains developed a highly sensitive alarm system for criticism and rejection. And even in the modern world, that ancient survival mechanism is still fully operational. When you imagine being judged, your brain reacts almost as if it is facing a genuine physical threat. This is why the fear of disapproval can feel so incredibly intense. Because this fear is so deeply uncomfortable, people naturally design their lives to avoid it. They avoid standing out, expressing unpopular opinions, or taking visible risks. Over time, this constant avoidance quietly shrinks a person's life. Dreams become smaller, goals become safer, and ambitions are watered down to be socially acceptable. The result is a tragic, invisible compromise. People begin to build their lives not around what they truly desire, but around what will provoke the least amount of criticism. But there is a heavy hidden cost to this approach. When your decisions are constantly filtered through the opinions of others, you slowly disconnect from your authentic self. The path you follow might look perfectly reasonable to everyone else, but internally, it can feel strangely hollow and unsatisfying. This is why so many people reach a certain stage of life and feel stuck or restless, even when nothing is obviously wrong on the surface. They sense that somewhere along the way, their major life choices were shaped more by the fear of judgment than by their own genuine desires. And that quiet realization leads to a profound question. How much of the life you are living today was truly chosen by you, and how much was shaped by the crowd? A few years ago, a young man named Alex had an idea. It wasn't a revolutionary concept that would change the world, but it excited him deeply. He wanted to start a small online business, selling handmade products created by local artisans in his community. For months, this idea consumed his thoughts. He meticulously researched suppliers, studied competitors, and imagined what his brand could become. Late at night, he would sit with his laptop, quietly building the website. The more time he poured into the project, the more alive he felt. For the first time in years, he was finally creating something that was entirely his own. But there was one massive problem holding him back. He never told a single soul, not his family, not his friends, not even his closest colleagues. Because every time he imagined sharing his vision, a dark cloud of doubt appeared. He wondered, what if they laugh? What if they think this is stupid? What if I fail, and everyone I know sees it happen? These anxious thoughts grew louder and more paralyzing with every passing day. He could vividly hear his relatives asking why he would leave a stable job, or telling him to focus on something more practical and realistic. Even though these harsh conversations had never actually happened, the imagined criticism felt entirely real to his nervous system. So, Alex did exactly what most people do when faced with this fear. He waited. He convinced himself he just needed more research and a better plan. Weeks slowly bled into months. Eventually, the website he had poured his heart into sat quietly on his hard drive, completely unfinished. The dream that had once excited him became a painful reminder, something he actively avoided thinking about. Not because it was impossible, but because the fear made it feel dangerous. 2 years later, something deeply unsettling happened. While scrolling through social media, Alex saw a post from an old college acquaintance. This man had started an online business selling handcrafted products, using a concept strikingly similar to the one Alex had abandoned. The brand had exploded in popularity. It had thousands of loyal customers, a beautiful website, and a flood of glowing reviews. Arjun stared at the screen in silence. He wasn't angry at the other man, but the moment triggered a sharp and painful realization. His own opportunity hadn't been blocked by a lack of money, knowledge, or market demand. The real barrier had been something entirely invisible. It was the overwhelming fear of what other people might think. That quiet, nagging fear had successfully convinced him to stay exactly where he was. Stories just like this play out every single day, in almost every area of life. People constantly abandon their true desires because they dread the reaction of the crowd. We hesitate to change careers, move to new cities, or share our art, all because we are terrified of potential judgment. So the safest decision becomes doing nothing at all. From the outside, this inaction looks like patience, caution, or responsibility. But in reality, it is simply fear wearing a much more respectable disguise. The true tragedy is that we rarely recognize this pattern in ourselves. We believe we are being logical and practical, while ignoring the deeper truth. There is a quiet voice constantly asking, "What will people think?" And if repeated enough, that single question becomes the invisible boundary of your entire life. Once this pattern becomes a habit, it doesn't just dictate one choice, it shapes your entire future. Which brings us to a fascinating psychological question. Why does the fear of judgment hold such staggering power over us? Why do the opinions of strangers often outweigh our own deepest desires? To understand why the fear of judgment controls so many decisions, we have to look backward at how the human brain actually evolved. For the vast majority of human history, survival depended entirely on belonging to a group. Early humans lived in tight-knit tribes where cooperation was a matter of life and death. Being accepted by the group meant you had food, shelter, and protection. Being rejected meant isolation, and in the harsh, ancient world, isolation was a death sentence. Because of this brutal reality, the human brain developed an incredibly strong sensitivity to social signals. Approval feels physically rewarding, while disapproval feels intensely threatening. Even though our modern, comfortable lives are vastly different from the tribal era, the underlying hardwiring of our brains has barely changed at all. The same survival instincts are still running the show, but now they are triggered by things that pose absolutely no threat to our physical safety. A critical comment, a negative review, or a moment of public embarrassment causes the brain to hit the panic button, interpreting the event as genuine social danger. Psychologists often describe this mental trap using a concept known as the spotlight effect. This is our ingrained tendency to overestimate how much others notice us. In our own minds, it feels as though a massive spotlight is constantly tracking our every move. Every mistake and awkward silence feels highly visible to the world. But the comforting truth is this: most people are far too consumed by their own insecurities and responsibilities to analyze the tiny details of your life. Think about a time you made a minor mistake in public, like stumbling over your words during a presentation. To you, it felt like a catastrophic event that everyone would remember. But if you asked the audience about it the next day, most wouldn't even recall it happened. Their attention had immediately snapped back to their own problems. Yet the memory burns brightly in your own mind. This is the illusion of the spotlight effect, magnifying the importance of how we appear to the rest of the world. Because this perceived attention is so agonizing, we instinctively shrink back to avoid exposure. And this avoidance creates a deeply limiting psychological loop. We begin to filter every action through the lens of social expectations. Before we speak, act, or create, we frantically calculate how it will be perceived by others. On the surface, this looks like careful, calculated thinking. But over time, the primary goal shifts from expressing our true selves to simply maintaining social approval. Psychologists refer to this subtle behavioral shift as social conformity pressure. We subconsciously adjust our actions to avoid the friction of standing out from the crowd. While social harmony is important, an excessive need for approval crushes individuality. Unconventional paths are ignored and brilliant ideas are taken to the grave. This fear is further amplified by something called negativity bias. As humans, we are wired to pay significantly more attention to negative feedback than positive reinforcement. If 10 people praise your work, but one person leaves a harsh critique, your mind will obsess over that single negative comment for days, trying to prevent that pain from happening again. Because of this bias, the threat of judgment feels disproportionately huge. The brain acts as a hyper-vigilant radar, constantly scanning the room for any signs of disapproval. In the ancient world, this system kept us alive, but today it creates an invisible cage. We unconsciously avoid public speaking, entrepreneurship, or vulnerability because the emotional risk feels too high. The tragic result is that millions of people trap themselves within a carefully constructed comfort zone, a sterile place where criticism is rare, but growth is impossible. Because true innovation, deep fulfillment, and massive success almost exclusively exist outside of that comfort zone, waiting for those willing to endure the judgment. When the fear of judgment becomes the silent architect of your life, the consequences are rarely explosive. Life doesn't suddenly collapse in a dramatic crisis. Instead, the damage is slow and nearly invisible. The effects compound quietly over decades, disguised as a series of practical, sensible decisions. You decide not to speak up in a meeting. You choose the safe corporate job over your true passion. You keep your art hidden in a drawer. Individually, each of these choices seems perfectly reasonable. But over time, they accumulate into a mountain of compromise that alters the entire trajectory of your life. The first major consequence is the shrinking of your ambition. Large goals create high visibility, and high visibility naturally invites judgment. So, your mind subtly lowers the bar. Your dreams become modest. Instead of asking, "What great thing do I want to build?" you ask, "What will my peers find acceptable?" The second consequence is the tragic loss of your authentic self. Every person possesses a unique blend of perspectives, talents, and quirks. But when social approval becomes your ultimate filter, those unique traits are buried. You start presenting a sanitized, highly defensive version of yourself to the world. This creates a painful internal disconnect. From the outside, your life might look incredibly stable and successful, but on the inside, you feel trapped in a character you didn't write. Another devastating consequence is the graveyard of invisible opportunities. When you refuse to take action because you fear criticism, the opportunity simply vanishes without a sound. There is no spectacular failure, but there is also no unexpected victory. By eliminating the risk of judgment, you also entirely eliminate the possibility of extraordinary reward. The final and most profound consequence is the slow, creeping arrival of regret. When people reach the later chapters of their lives, their greatest pain rarely comes from their failures. Psychological studies on life satisfaction reveal a universal truth. We recover from our failures relatively quickly, but we are haunted by the chances we never took. Failure brings temporary disappointment, but it provides closure. Regret, however, leaves an open wound, a persistent, echoing question of, what if I had just tried? This is why the fear of judgment is so lethal. It doesn't destroy your life. It merely tranquilizes it. It gently nudges you down the path of least resistance. Until one day, you wake up and realize your life wasn't authored by your own values, but ghost-written by the imagined opinions of people who barely thought of you at all. But once you finally recognize how deeply this fear has infected your decisions, a massive psychological shift becomes entirely possible. The goal is not to eradicate the fear completely. Fearing rejection is a biological reality. Even the most elite performers feel its sting. The goal is to strip away its control over your life. The first step to breaking free is accepting a humbling but liberating truth. Most people are endlessly fascinated by themselves, not by you. Everyone is fighting their own battles and obsessed with their own insecurities. Once you realize the spotlight isn't actually on you, the suffocating pressure to perform instantly drops. The second step is fundamentally reframing how you view criticism. We are conditioned to view criticism as proof that we did something wrong. In reality, criticism is simply proof that you are doing something visible. If you are creating, building, or speaking your truth, a percentage of people will always push back. Some will cheer for you, some won't care, and some will attack. This isn't failure. It is the inevitable tax you must pay to leave the safety of the shadows. The third step is upgrading the question that drives your life. Stop asking, "What will they think of me?" and replace it with something much heavier. Ask yourself, will I respect this decision when I look back at it in 10 years? This shifts your focus from cheap short-term approval to long-term personal integrity. When you evaluate your choices based on the respect of your future self, the opinions of the crowd suddenly lose their weight. What once felt risky now feels absolutely necessary. The fourth step is intentionally building your tolerance for social discomfort. Just like lifting weights tears muscle to build strength, exposing yourself to mild judgment builds emotional armor. Start small. Voice a dissenting opinion in a meeting. Hit publish on that blog post. Take a tiny action that makes you slightly nervous about what others might say. Every time you survive that moment of vulnerability, your brain learns a crucial lesson. The social danger you imagined was a phantom, and you are stronger than you thought. The final step is mastering the art of filtering feedback. Constructive criticism comes from people in the arena who genuinely want to see you win. Social noise, however, comes from people projecting their own fears and insecurities onto your ambitions. You must fiercely protect your mind from this noise. When you finally learn to extract the lessons from the builders and ignore the noise from the sidelines, you unlock an incredible level of freedom. You will notice your creativity explode, your confidence deepen, and your world expand. Not because the fear is gone, but because it is no longer sitting in the driver's seat. At some point, we all face a quiet reckoning. We look back and realize how many of our choices were simply performances designed to appease the crowd. Those safe, socially acceptable choices protected us from embarrassment, but they silently starved our curiosity, our art, and our potential. The ultimate irony is that the opinions we sacrifice our dreams for are entirely fleeting. A harsh comment is forgotten in a day, but an abandoned dream aches for a lifetime. The business is never launched, the book's never written, and the words never spoken. These invisible ghosts are the true cost of letting the crowd dictate your worth. This is why you must ruthlessly audit your fear of judgment. Never let the temporary thoughts of passing strangers become the permanent architects of your destiny. Stop asking what the world will think, and start asking what kind of extraordinary life you could build if you simply stopped caring. As the ancient philosopher Lao Tzu powerfully observed, care about what other people think, and you will always be their prisoner. The exact second you stop letting the gallery control your strings, you reclaim your freedom. The freedom to build a life that is unapologetically your own. Because when the curtains finally close, this life is not judged by the crowd. It is experienced entirely by you. If this message shifted your perspective today, make sure to subscribe to Wealth Waves for more deep dives into the psychology and mindset required to build a richer life. Until the next video, keep thinking deeply, step out of the shadows, and keep growing.